Hi, Nataly. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're just here to talk our week number 4 theme, which is advancing systems change. And today we have a great guest with us, Nataly, who's going to be really talking to us about student advocacy as a vehicle to advance systems change, to really change the system for students, for families, for our communities we serve. Um, and so we're really excited to have you here with us, Nataly, today. Yeah, if you want to introduce yourself, go for it.
So hi, my name is Nataly. I recently graduated from CSULA with a bachelor's in political science and a minor in law and society. Um, I used to work for SoCal Can. I started off as a student advocacy intern, and then from there, I moved up to become the policy and research assistant for SoCal Can. And within my role in SoCal Can, I helped design the Changemakers Fellowship, where I worked with a lot of students that were really interested in furthering their voice and just advocating for the students on their campus. So that's just a little bit of what I did in SoCal Can.
Yeah, Changemakers was such a groundbreaking program fellowship that we designed to really train 30 student leaders on how to be advocates for the issues they cared about. And Natalie was, you were such an important and pivotal part of Changemakers, and we're excited to continue Changemakers in other versions, even through the COVID pandemic. So thank you so much for all the work you did. But let's get right into it. I think the first topic we wanted to talk with you about was just student advocacy, right? So I wanted to ask you about, what do you think is the importance of student advocacy to advance systems change?
Yeah, so something that's really important within student advocacy is just really student stories. I think people don't really realize how impactful their stories are, um, their personal stories of what they're really going through. Just student stories, they really seem to be the most impactful. They really are the ones that have stakeholders really think about like the situation and really want to do something about the issue, right? I know something that every time we would go advocate to like the Capitol or just in school in general, like the main focus was just really like the student story. Like, okay, like making sure that the story that you're telling is going to is going to be impactful, and it's going to let that person remember you and really think like, wow, like this is something that's really affecting the student. And not only this student, but many more other students are probably going through a similar situation, and maybe even worse. So student stories are very impactful. And also another thing that people don't realize is that students tend to have the best solution for the problem. When you're the one that's really going through a problem, you tend to think about different solutions, right? So students tend to come up with like the most easiest and practical solution than a lot of stakeholders that tend to make the solution a little bit more complicated than it really is. I think just really knowing that as a student, your voice is really powerful, and that you should be heard, and that a lot of times you have the better answer than these stakeholders really do.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, something we share with Changemakers or any other students that we've trained or student advocates was like, make sure that when you're telling the story, the decision maker is going to remember you when they're making like that decision, right? When they're going to vote on the bill or when they're like discussing in committee, sharing that a lot of times decision makers need to remember the student who talked to them about the issue, how they're personally impacted. And it's just really adding that face to the problem. It's so important, and students do that for us.
Mhm.
Um, the second thing we want to just really chat here with you about is, what types of systemic changes are students pushing for in these times?
Right. So especially right now with everything that's been happening, specifically COVID-19, the pandemic, it really impacted a lot of students in very different ways. Students and their families, their education route, and things like that. So I know a prevalent issue that a lot of students have been advocating for or are really pushing for is really reducing the fees within tuition. We know that a lot of students are still paying full tuition, even though they're not using all the resources or services that they're paying for, like that they would have when they would attend school physically. So just really reducing those tuition fees, that's really important right now. A lot of other new issues have come up for students as well. And one of them is also mental health. We know that a lot of students are reporting high levels of anxiety due to online learning. It's something relatively new for a lot of people. And a lot of students don't really have the proper space or environment to really be able to focus on their studies. And that makes it very difficult for a lot of students to be able to persevere, really just get their education done. And we see this a lot more in like first generation, low income students, right? They're sharing the room with like four other siblings. So it's really hard for them to have a space where they could really just concentrate and focus on their schoolwork. They're also trying to balance their finances. We know that COVID-19 really impacted a lot of families financially. So a lot of these students are also struggling to make ends meet with their family. And another issue that a lot of students are also pushing for is housing. We know that when COVID-19 hit, we all had to quarantine, just really stay at home. And a lot of students that were dorming were actually being pushed out of the dorms and were just left to figure things out on their own. And a lot of students that were international students didn't really have the money to really just buy a plane ticket and go back home. And as it is, a lot of traveling was actually stopped due to COVID-19. So a lot of these students were really just insecure about where they were going to sleep the next few days or the next few months with quarantine and with this pandemic going on. So those are just a few of the most prevalent issues that I know about that I've been hearing a lot of students have been pushing for.
Yeah, thank you. Those are super important, and it's just like it impacts different students very differently. Like thank you for highlighting the international students who were really going through a lot, a few months ago with the COVID pandemic, whether they were going to be able to stay here, their visas, and just a lot. So yeah, it's important to uplift. I think just here the last question that we wanted to have for you is just, you were a student leader, you were a student advocate. You mentioned that you advocated at the Capitol, both at the state capitol in Sacramento, at the federal capitol in Washington, D.C. And you held different positions. But what advice do you have for students who are interested in stepping up to be a leader on campus or student advocate? What would you tell those students?
Yeah, so for those students that are really looking into advocacy, all I can say is really just go for it. Like, don't be discouraged. I think oftentimes as a student, we get discouraged, sorry, because we see all of these student leaders and just like they're president of like this organization, they're president of this, or they're just doing a whole bunch of things. And you just think like, oh, maybe I don't have the experience to really be a student advocate or things like that. So we become discouraged. Honestly, like, don't be discouraged if you see other people doing what they're doing. Like, just go for it. Just make your voice heard, and just remember why you're advocating and why you're really pushing for making your voice be heard. Like, if it's not just for you, it's for all the students around you, like, always remember that when you are speaking out, you're not only speaking out for yourself, but you're speaking out for like thousands of other students that are probably facing the same issue as you or feeling the same way as you, but haven't been able to really make their voice heard. So I can say is really just go for it. Don't be scared. It can be intimidating at times, but don't let that get to you, because once you have that opportunity to really sit down and speak with a stakeholder and really tell them everything that you're feeling, that you're going through, and how other students are being impacted, it feels amazing. Like, to really just know that somebody heard you and that you're making a difference.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. That's great advice. Yeah. During my time, just both as a student leader myself and working, I've had the privilege of meeting incredible student leaders like yourself. And a lot of times, you just go for it, and making sure that students realize they have a voice and they can use it and they can really create real change with that voice. So really appreciate you being a student leader. Also appreciate you making the time to talk with us about student advocacy and systems change, and really celebrating SoCal Can's 15 years and looking forward to the next.
Yes.
But hope you're well, and take care, Nataly.
Thank you so much, Marcos. Have a nice day.
Thank you.